Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Numbers, coming to you live from our studios here at Kokomlemle in Accra.
Well, on today's show, we break down Ghana's external debt restructuring, focusing on the office, agreement, reliefs, and conditionalities.
We'll be disintegrating the complex agreement plus future debt burdens as Government of Ghana claims agreement with external creditors have saved the nation some $10 billion. My name is Winston Taki, and I will be doing this with...
Of course, my name is Isaac Ofieje, and we'll be back after this short break. Well, and you're welcome back to Beyond the Numbers. Tonight, our job is very, very simple. Now, this week, one of the big news, Winston, has been the external debt restructuring, especially the agreement in principle with the Eurobond creditors. Our job here is to break down the issues for you to understand what are the offers, what are the agreements, and what's the future debt burden for Ghana. And in terms of relief, what is the magnitude of relief that this country has? So tonight is a very packed show. It's take and stay. We will do justice to the numbers. All we are going to do is to speak according to the numbers. What the complex tables, the complex figures in the agreement, what they mean to you and the Government of Ghana. Winston.
Now, let's go to the tax screen right now to let viewers understand the history of Ghana's debt. When we talk about it, we consistently have been hearing the domestic for quite a long time. Now, let's take a look at how Ghana's relation with bilaterals, external creditors, multilaterals, and all these figures that indeed will make us understand the reflection towards our future in terms of debt repayment.
Well, when you spoke about domestic, in the domestic space, we called it the DDEP, Domestic Debt Exchange Program. It's the same thing happening in the external space, maybe with different conditions and offers, but we decided to call it the EDEP, the External Debt Restructuring. So how did this whole thing happen? It happened when the IMF saw this problem for the country in terms of the, balance of payment. We've gone to the IMF for one simple thing, balance of payments constraints. We don't have dollars to do the external exercises and activities that we are supposed to do, bring in pharmaceuticals and even petroleum products. So the IMF estimated our balance of payments from 2023 to 2026. We are sticking within this period because the IMF program covers 2023 to 2026. And you can see the country's, balance of payments right from 2023. If you do the tabulation, Winston, in terms of the gap, gap means if you take away what the Government of Ghana can get from its external trade versus what it would take out of this country in terms of forex, what is the gap that is supposed to fund? When we calculated, we got about
almost $15
billion. Now, this $15 billion, you see two concrete sources in terms of the funding. The World Bank, let me start with the IMF, who are funding, we all know it's about $3 billion package. The IMF, on the other hand, is sponsoring somewhere around $1.5, $1.4 billion. If you take away from the gap, then it means we are left with about $10 billion to fund in terms of the residual. And that is the reason why
I want to understand, out of the $10 billion, some will question whether as a nation, we don't have the capacity to generate, looking at our vast resource output that we have. We have gold, we have diamond. Many will question, why are we poor? That's the key question. But nonetheless, with all this debt piling up on us as a nation, what do you see as a leverage, especially in order to raise such an amount of money?
I mean, in order to raise such an amount of money, you have the World Bank and the IMF already stepping in to give you significant component. But they said, we see a way for you. And the way we see is that you need to do debt restructuring, cut your debt to a certain significant level. And if you are able to do that successfully, you should have a free space of about $10 billion to fund your balance of payments. And you heard the finance minister when he was announcing that the external debt restructuring has been successful. He said savings of about $8 billion from the the commercial creditors and about $2 billion from the external.
Now let's look at that number. Next slide. I think we'll look at that figure right now on the screen. That is, we see first, which is 18. Yes.
So, I mean, we are talking about the, the time part of this whole external debt restructuring. What has been the time part? If you do the calculation, it's taking the country about 18 months to do the proper external debt restructuring. We all know, if we can actually see the timeline.
Yes, I think
we'll have the timeline very soon. Then you see when government of Ghana decided to do what we call the defaults. So we defaulted somewhere December 2022. We told our external creditors that we cannot pay. And so we had to break our debt into two and do the restructuring at the domestic side and at the external side. We want to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to demonstrate the figures on the smart wall right now for you to see what we are talking about in terms of the time part and the magnitude of relief that the country has actually received from the external debt restructuring. Stay with us. We'll be back after this short break.
So we were talking about the numbers right about a few minutes ago. Then that has to do with looking at that debt restructuring, especially on the face of external creditors. Now we go back to the screen to assess how much of Ghana's external debt has been restructured. So Kofi.
Yeah, I mean, it's always important to start from the domestic space.
Absolutely.
We are talking about 203 billion Ghana cedis that was earmarked for restructuring. That was the restructured amount. In terms of the external debt, we know there are two components. The bilateral side, we are talking about the debt that Ghana owes respective countries. So China, there's France, there's US, and all of that. That's about $5.4 billion that the country earmarked. Then you come to the commercial side. The Eurobond was about around $13 billion that we earmarked for restructuring.
Now, in terms of the domestic one, you can see 203 billion is approximately 4.6 billion Ghana dollars.
If you use the current
exchange rate, looking at that. And many have questioned whether the domestic debt has been quite effective. We've heard governments consistently say, yes, we have a successful domestic debt exchange program. But most also have questioned its implication on the financial sector, its implication on the income of investors, whether after this, how government will be able to boost investor confidence in a domestic economy.
Yeah, we know how the country has suffered in terms of the bonds market. It's no longer there. And you have governments, the only market available to them is a treasury bill, and they are borrowing significantly from that market. Recently, we've seen the reduction in the rate that has happened. Now, let's talk about the savings, because of the important point you made. The 61 billion Ghana cedis is the savings that, according to the government, they made from the domestic debt exchange program. In terms of the bilateral, the finance minister says we are talking about a significant component, $2 billion of savings at the bilateral side. And if you go to the commercial, he mentions $8 billion. But there's this figure there, $4.7 billion, because we want to restrict the conversation to the IMF program space or span. And the savings we are talking about is about 4.7 billion in terms of debt cancellation or relief. Now, this figure, just like I mentioned, 4.7 billion. How did we do it in terms of the restructuring at the commercial side? I always say that if you look at the external debt restructuring, the most important or complex side was the commercial or the Eurobond space, because it is actually governed by very, very complex laws. And if you do not take time, you are going to, have yourself to pay huge judgment debt if you don't do it well. So for us to get a relief, or let's say a cutoff, or let's say even a cancellation of $4.7 billion, that's huge. And we must say that those who did this negotiation have really, really done well. If you look at this time period, 18 months, to be able to get 4.7 billion in terms of restructuring is huge, Winston.
You know, many consider the players in that particular market, commercial market, especially how they are able to increase, especially their bonds to both African countries. That selling those bonds, especially those debt, is very high.
Very.
But for them to consider the factors at play and say, I'm giving you this free leeway. And to Ghana as a country, this is a very good advantage for us to prioritize domestically how we intend to generate this revenue. The timelines will come, we'll be going there shortly to understand how much money we'll be needing going forward, especially in paying our debts that will be outstanding.
So definitely you're talking about the burden ahead.
Yes.
But in terms of cash flows to the economy, as a result of this successful, I'm using the finance minister's word, successful external debt restructuring in terms of the commercial, $4.7 billion cash flow into the economy. In terms of if we're able to do things right, going forward, we wouldn't have to use this $4.7 billion to pay debt or to service debt. It will be available for us if we're able to generate it to fund other important amenities in the society. Now, let's focus more on the commercial restructuring, the Eurobonds. The reason why it is important is that if you look at all the debt restructuring that we have done, it is the most difficult. That is why I say that we have to cut some slack for the finance ministry in terms of this fantastic and very fast negotiation. 18 months.
It takes a lot of weight to get that particular agreement into
If you compare it to our senior IMF mates like Zambia and Co, who took the lead before we even arrived, and the fact that within a very short period of time, they took about 2 years. We have used a little about 1 year to do this fantastic work. I think that they need to be commended for such a fiscal space. But beyond this, there's a burden ahead. We'll speak about that. So that's the sweet story, but there's also the bitter story ahead.
Help me understand. I'm seeing power bonds capped at $1.6 billion, option 1. External bonds restructuring proposal, DDP investor options. What does this mean? And I'm secondly seeing another one coming up, which is options 2, disco bonds. Is it a time for party?
Well, definitely not a time for party, Winston. Disco in financial terms simply means, I know you know it, but you just want to make fun of the word disco. But in financial terms, it simply means discounted bonds. It means the value of that bond has been reduced. So investors who will be hoping to participate in Ghana's external debt restructuring at the commercial level have 2 options. The first option is whether they should buy what they call the par bonds. And just by the word, par means equal value. That par bond is the option 1. But in terms of the selling of that bonds, it's capped at $1.6 billion. It means that if government of Ghana starts receiving offers and they hit $1.6 billion, that will be the ceiling. Yes.
Okay.
And consider other options. So if you are an investor, an international investor, and you are looking at this, the agreement in principle, and you want to go for option 2, is what we call the disco bonds. It means it has no cap, no limit. If you want to, be part of it, you can be part of it. Now let's go, a little deep into each of these bonds that we are talking about.
I'm seeing the terms of the power bond, which is no haircut, 1.5% interest rate, first installment which begins from January 2036 and maturity January 2037. Help me understand. When they say no haircut, initially when the domestic debt exchange conversation began, the key conversation from the then finance minister was no barber shop for the economy, no barber shop for any bondholder, but yet we experienced that. But what does it mean in terms of engagement with external credit?
I mean, Winston, the first assurance came from the president when he said there will be no haircut. And in fact, if you are buying a power bond as an international investor, know that what the president said, there will be no haircut. You won't get a haircut if you decide to buy the power bonds. But we'll explain, there's a portion that you need to suffer a haircut. Now, if you look at the power bonds, they say no haircut.
Absolutely.
No haircut simply means that, if you decide to look at the power bonds, if your bond value, the face value was 1,000 cedis or 1,000 cedis when you bought it, that bond still stays the same. no haircut on the principal.
Great.
But what happens is that the coupon rate or the interest rate has been, pegged at 1.5%. It means that usually the Eurobond, creditors or the money we get from the Eurobond space, the interest rate is about 7 to 8%. Just imagine buying a bond with a coupon rate of 7 to 8%, and now the new rate is 1.5%. So if you are buying a power bond, know that the value still stays the same. The face value of your principal is the same, but your interest will get a haircut. So the interest will reduce from the usual 7 to 8% now to 1.5%.
So when you get that interest on that principal, the first payment that we'll be likely to see if you bought a power bond will start from January 2036.
That's a very long time.
Absolutely. And to get a full maturity, as in based on this tabulation, you have to wait till 2037 to experience your full payments. That is a very interesting offer.
Now, Winston, let's look at this table that we picked from the statement that was put out.
Yes.
Now, let's interpret this table for our viewers to understand when we are talking about the power bond, what it means. So, if you are an investor and you bought Ghana's sovereign bonds in the international space, you bought a bond, and the face value was 1,000 cedis. When you buy a power bond, that's your 1,000 cedis. This is how it is going to be distributed. About 96% of that amount you bought will go into what government of Ghana calls the bond par. That is the main component of the power bonds. 96% of your principal will go into that. Then 40% will go into
4%. Actually,
yeah, 4%. Yeah, will go into 4% will go into what the government of Ghana calls the down payment. So in essence, that your 1,000 cedis, you buy bond par 960 cedis. The government of Ghana will start making a down payment of $40 for you. Now remember that we defaulted in December 2022.
Yeah.
Then we're all debating on when should be the cutoff point in terms of looking at the restructuring. And they all agreed that it should be somewhere around 31st December 2023. It means that if you bought government of Ghana bonds at the international space and they defaulted, they were not paying your interest, what happens is that the past due interest, which they call the PDI, will be converted into bonds. So Winston, if government of Ghana was supposed to pay you $2,000 of interest or $25 million of interest and they've not paid, they are going to convert that $25 million into bonds. And
now we're looking at zero nominal as well as total into 37% on that particular bond.
Yeah, that bond that they are going to convert, you are going to get 0% interest. So that bond will not attract any coupon rates.
Absolutely. Because of time, let's move to the other part.
But it's important to know that if your PDI will suffer a haircut of 37%.
And that is very, very
very huge.
If you are an investor. Now so, let's look at the discounted one. The discounted one, I'm saying,
right?
Absolutely. We're saying automatically you're going to experience 37% on your principal with 5% interest between the period of 2024 to 2028. We are likely to also experience a 6% interest after 2028, followed by an installment payment which begins from 2026. That is a very close time and look like a bit long in a way.
I mean, I want to ask a very simple. So if you are an investor, you have these two options. Which one will you go for? Just looking at the fact that you bought a dollar bond. The dollar almost stays the same in terms of value. Which one will you go for?
Looking at as an investor, I'll go for where there is stability, where there is security. And dollar has consistently been showing, proving that that is where to keep my money. So I'll rather go for the long term, because if I go long-term bond as an investor in dollar denomination, I'm likely to stay secure compared to going short-term.
This means that, Winston, you don't like the disco bonds.
I don't like
You don't want the disco bonds. You want the power bonds.
Absolutely.
You want your money to be held the same, but give me a haircut on the interest.
Yes.
I think that's a brilliant
That makes sense.
way. But
that is
know that if you're an investor, the power bond is capped at 1.6 billion. It means if you are not fast and government of Ghana gets subscription of about 1.6 billion, you may have to choose the disco, which I think is also a good bond. I mean, if you look at the fact that maybe you may never get your money and government of Ghana is giving you a new bond, disco bond, you should go for it.
Now let's look at the terms of Eurobond restructuring, expected interest payments in 2024. So this year, 2024, all those who have gone for par bonds, I expect will be receiving $12 million in terms of debt restructured. Disco bonds will also be seeing $169 million, with the total being $181 million. In simple terms, Kofi, help us understand.
Now, this is the burden ahead that we've been speaking about. So in 2024, although we've restructured our debt,
Yes.
government will be paying $12 million to those who buy power bonds, $169 million to those who buy disco bonds. The total for 2024, government will have to cough up $181 million and pay those who buy the new bonds.
Just in 2024?
Just in 2024. Now, you see on your screens, this is important because if we are not done the debt restructuring at the external level, this was the Eurobond burden that we're going to pay. 2023, we're expected to pay maturing, principals, $148 million 2023, $525 million 2025. The biggest was in 2026,
which will be $2.25 billion. That's very huge.
Now, government of Ghana saw this and they say, hey, wait, let's take a pause and look at this because we cannot afford this in the future. That is why.
Is that a smart decision, looking at the head ahead?
Very. That's why the debt restructuring at the external level is important, because considering the kind of situation we are in and looking at this burden ahead, if the government had not been able to strike a deal with the external creditors, it would have been very, very difficult, especially in the Eurobond space. Now, I want us to look at this interesting graph. This tells a story. For me, it tells a story proper.
So once upon a time, go ahead.
I mean, in terms of the Eurobond, after the DDEP is before and after.
Yes.
If we are not done the DDEP, the times when we did not have any EDEP, we used to pay interest on our Eurobonds about $1 billion every year. That's the average. Now, after the restructuring, that $1 billion is going to reduce to now $298.3 million per year going forward.
Interesting.
That's a smart move, because without the restructuring, we cannot pay $1 billion to Eurobond holders on interest alone.
I'm seeing a difference of $741 million.
So that's how much we've saved.
And economists will look at this figure and say, if government has restructured, this difference provides a leeway for government to prioritize domestic investment, capital investment. We see more growth accelerating within the year. But the key issue has to do with what type of investment. Are they self-refinancing investment? Are they self-refinancing projects? These are key questions. We can say we need roads. If you look at the value of road and how it to contribute to economic productivity, that is in the long term. But asking whether it to accrue the needed money to refinance the loans is something we are here to see.
I mean, this is a huge savings for the country in terms of interest payment servicing. Now, if we are not done the restructuring, I mean, right after the restructuring, for me, this is the burden ahead. Although we've done external debt restructuring, this is our debt burden in terms of coupon payment plus fees plus principals going forward. 2023, if you look at how much we are going to pay, we were supposed to pay $477 million. 2025, we need to cough up $692 million. 2026. So just look at this graph. I want to show this.
It looks very scary.
Yeah, it looks very scary. This is the burden ahead, but government will have to consolidate their revenue because they need to get more from cocoa, restructure the deals with the gold people and get more from gold. You have new lithium, make sure you get more. I mean, we have to put ourselves in a very good position to make sure that this burden ahead will not become a headache for us to request for a new restructuring.
The key picture investors are looking out for is the fiscal space going into the election 2024. Currently, government has prioritized a lot of unfinished projects, Agenda 111, many projects that are already going. We've seen road construction. There's a need to pay some of the contractors to make sure that this project meets the deadline. All these and many factors are into play. key factors to do with stability of the city. Government is considering doing that. And this announcement, just before we came in, I received a mail from the Finance Ministry that the Finance Minister will be meeting media personnel tomorrow, Saturday. I'm sure some of the key announcements will do with the engagement with external creditors and some announcement that may have developed out of that meeting. Well,
look, I mean, the burden ahead is huge, but the most important thing is that we've been able to save about $1.4 billion, $4.4 billion in terms of the restructuring. So, I mean, this is good news for the government, although there is a burden ahead. This has been Beyond the Numbers, and I always do this with Winston Taki.
And here's Kofi.
Next week, we'll come your way
again
with more. This has been Beyond the Numbers. Stay safe.